The tragic case of Sarah Reed, how the law failed and why justice is still out of reach. The heartbreaking death of Sarah Reed in police custody has once again exposed the flaws in our justice system, particularly in how it deals with accountability, mental health, and the treatment of vulnerable individuals by law enforcement. Despite widespread outrage and calls for justice, the law has failed to deliver justice for Sarah and her family. The lack of accountability for the officers involved, the inadequate mental health care she received, and the lack of a proper investigation into the circumstances of her death show that the legal system is not serving those it is meant to protect. 1. Lack of accountability for officers. When a person dies in police custody, the expectation is a thorough and impartial investigation. However, in Sarah Reed's case, no officers were charged, despite serious concerns about how she was treated while detained. This lack of accountability reflects a wider issue within the justice system where police misconduct, especially when it involves marginalized communities, often goes unpunished. It sends a damaging message that law enforcement officers can escape justice, no matter how severe their actions may be. 2. Inadequate mental health support. Sarah Reed struggled with mental health issues, including depression and PTSD, yet she did not receive the care she desperately needed while in custody. This is a critical failure in how the justice system treats individuals with mental health challenges. The lack of adequate care for vulnerable individuals in police custody is a long-standing problem that often results in avoidable tragedies. The failure to prioritize mental health care in detention shows a lack of empathy and responsibility for the well-being of those in custody. 3. Insufficient investigation into deaths in custody. The circumstances surrounding Sarah Reed's death raised serious questions, particularly the conclusion that she died by strangulation. There was a lack of transparency and thoroughness in the investigation, leaving many unanswered questions. Deaths in police custody should be met with full, impartial investigations, but too often they are dismissed or poorly handled. This failure to investigate properly is another example of how the legal system falls short when it comes to ensuring justice for those who die in custody. 4. Failure to prevent police brutality. Sarah Reed's death is part of a much larger issue of police brutality, particularly towards vulnerable or marginalized groups. Despite public calls for reform, the legal system has not adequately addressed the systemic violence and abuse of power by police. While some reforms have been implemented, they have been slow and insufficient in tackling the root causes of police violence. The law continues to fail in ensuring that police officers uphold their duty to serve and protect all citizens, especially those from marginalized communities. 5. Racial and gender bias in treatment. As a black woman, Sarah Reed's experiences with law enforcement may have been influenced by racial and gender biases. Discrimination in the criminal justice system remains a widespread issue, with individuals from minority groups often facing unequal treatment. The law has been slow to address the racial and gender disparities that exist within policing, contributing to the unjust treatment of people like Sarah. The failure to tackle these systemic issues perpetuates inequality and erodes public trust in the justice system. 6. Lack of support for families of victims. When someone dies in police custody, their family is left to navigate a broken system with little support. Sarah Reed's family has had to endure lengthy and difficult battles for justice, compounded by a lack of transparency and accountability. Families of victims are often forced to fight for recognition of their loved ones' rights and dignity. The law should protect families from having to fight a system that should be working in their favor. 7. Erosion of public trust. The failure to properly address Sarah Reed's death, along with other cases of police brutality, has had a deep impact on public trust in the justice system. When people feel that the law is not serving them or protecting their rights, it erodes the foundation of justice in society. Marginalized communities, in particular, are left feeling abandoned by a system that is supposed to ensure fairness and equality. The public's trust in law enforcement and the justice system is in crisis, and reform is urgently needed. Conclusion: the need for systemic reform. Sarah Reed's tragic death is a stark reminder of how the justice system continues to fail those who are most vulnerable. The lack of accountability for police officers, the failure to provide mental health care, and the systemic racism and gender bias within law enforcement all contribute to an environment in which justice is not served. It is clear that the law, in its current form, is not protecting the vulnerable. We must demand reform to ensure that incidents like Sarah Reed's death are met with justice. The system must be held accountable, and meaningful change must be implemented to ensure that no one else has to suffer in the same way. Sarah Reed's story should not be forgotten. It must serve as a catalyst for change in a system that desperately needs reform. Only then can we restore trust in the justice system and ensure that it serves all people equally, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status.